wings. Let's give them everything we've got!
All wings report in. Darth Magog is standing by with the Battlefront II ranking video. Today, we're taking to the skies to test pilot and rank all the standard units in Star Wars Battlefront II Starfighter Assault. Now, while there are some fighters that are clearly better than others, there's no one invincible starfighter. Well, outside of the hero ships, but that's another video for another day. Every fighter on this list can be countered, and with a good pilot, even the worst ship on this list can beat the best one. Even so, some ships have more downsides than others, and that's what we're here to discuss. Here are all the best Star Wars Battlefront II Starfighters ranked best to worst. Yes, every list has to have a worst member, and unfortunately the TIE Bomber fits that role almost perfectly. There are plenty of cool things about the TIE Bomber. Its payload of double proton torpedoes is pretty heavy, and it's got the thickest hull of all the bombers on this list. You really have to admire their cluster missiles when attacking enemy corvettes. I also love the electronic countermeasures ability to offer some semblance of longevity to this unshielded ship. If nothing else, it keeps the fire and forget players off your back. That said, the TIE Bomber has a load of flaws that take away from its functionality. For one, it's got the worst blaster of the bombers. It fires at the same speed as the Y-Wing, but slower than the Hyena class bomber with the Separatists. And that trade-off, for some reason, makes the TIE's laser build up heat faster than the other three bombers in the game. Its mobility isn't any different than the other bombers on this list, but the larger target profile makes me less comfortable immediately. That, combined with how it handles, just puts the TIE Bomber at the bottom of my list. Not to pick on the Empire or the First Order, but they do have some of the worst ships imaginable. The TIE Interceptor SF starts off the dirty dozen. It's faster than your average fighter, is more durable than the average interceptor, and the tail gunner turret ability is very creative, so much so that I wish more fighters and hero ships had this ability. It's also one of the few dark side ships that's actually ray shielded, albeit lightly, so it wins in a few categories. Usually the afterburner is enough to get away from enemy missiles, and the ship is equipped with concussion missiles of its own for a counter-strike. The downsides of this: the First Order Interceptor is bulkier than most of the interceptors on the list, but not enough for it to matter. The shields are more of a nuisance than a deterrent, and even with the tail gunner turret, it doesn't put out enough damage to discourage the enemy starfighters that it faces, namely the much bulkier X-Wing and the nimbler A-Wing. There's almost no instance where I really want to use that over getting additional damage with something like a hardlock or maybe a burst laser. The turret would be a better defense if the ship was bulkier, but as it stands, it's not the wisest way to shake a tail. Its rate of fire is pretty slow, and if the data mining is to be believed, then it's the slowest of the interceptors in rate of fire, over even the TIE Interceptor that fires 4 blasts at a time instead of just 2, and the heat buildup makes the First Order Interceptor more prone to overheating, or forces you to use a star card to mitigate this issue. If this thing packed both torpedoes and a laser barrage, I think an argument could be made for it outclassing a few other ships as an all-around vessel, but as it stands, it's my number 12 pick. I'm sure I'm going to draw some vitriol for putting the V-Wing so low on the list. There are lots of things to love about the V-Wing. For one, the V-Wing is easily the bulkiest of the non-hero interceptor class fighters, and that comes in handy in a pinch. Sometimes that extra 100 points in hull strength makes all the difference in the world. The ability suite is perfectly suited for a dogfighter. Dodge missiles with an afterburner turbo boost, take down enemy shields with burst fire, and a heat sink to help you shoot down those pesky bombers on bombing runs. The V-Wing is everything you'd expect from a quality starfighter in a dogfight. The big problems with this ship are, it's just adequate in all areas. Yes, it's faster than the TIE Fighter, the X-Wing, the ARC-170, and the Vulture droid, but it's supposed to be, because it's an interceptor. Yes, it shoots fast, but no faster than the A-Wing or the droid Tri-Fighter. It feels a bit slower and clunkier than the A-Wing and the Tri-Fighter as well, and has a large target profile like the TIE Interceptor. In fact, I'd venture to say that because of its awkward shape, it's less efficient at maneuvering through gaps than the TIE Interceptor is. Well, the Imperial version anyway. It's still a better ship than the SF First Order version. And frankly, the V-Wing is too hyper-specialized and stuck in its role as an interceptor. You can strafe enemy infantry with it, but not as long as an A-Wing could, unless you use the heatsink ability. The worst part is probably the burst fire mode. It just doesn't last long enough to make a difference on large enemy targets or even hero ships sometimes. I know that sounds like a lot of negatives, and the positives are still there. It's just that a well-rounded fighter like this one shouldn't be filling an interceptor role. It might have been better off representing the Republic as a proper starfighter, but as it stands, number 11, it is. At number 10 is the hero of the TIE Fighter series, the TIE Fighter itself. The TIE is actually pretty well rounded, hosting a speed boosting ability in Afterburner, which is handy in dodging heroes and missiles. It's maneuverable enough to manage missiles on its own and is fast enough to keep pace with other starfighters. The ship's hull has pretty standard bulk, which is nice, and the proton torpedo tube makes it a good multi-role starfighter in a pinch. That being said, it wouldn't be this low on the list without its fair share of problems. This thing fires the slowest of all the starfighters, does the least damage, and heats up the most. You mostly want a starfighter class for offensive capability, with enough defenses to get you to a target, then flex out to a dogfight, and the TIE barely scrapes by in this role. It easily outmaneuvers a number of ships on this list and is more than enough for a one-on-one. This feels like they just strapped a proton torpedo tube to the V-Wing, slapped on some solar panels, and said go kill rebel scum. Which is fair, since the V-Wing was a forerunner to the TIE Fighter in lore, so points for accuracy. But as for in-game viability, the TIE Fighter only gets 10th place. As a veteran of the Battle for Naboo on N64, it pains me that I can't rate the N1 any higher on this list. It's easily my favorite starfighter in the franchise and has been since 1999. And why shouldn't it be? It's got an onboard astromech droid for quick repairs, a devastating dual laser cannon overcharge comparable to the T-65 X-Wing, handles like a dream, and carries proton torpedoes for good measure. I can't think of a CIS starship that can outlast this thing, at least not in a straight fight. But with that, of course, there are problems that can hold it back. First and foremost, the N1 fires at a low rate in its stock form, 360 RPM if I remember correctly. I could be wrong and would gladly take corrections in the comments down below, but it's certainly a bit slower than the X-Wing, the Vulture droid, and even the TIE Fighters. The second issue is overall availability. This ship is only available in the Naboo maps for Galactic Assault, or if you die in the Hero Starfighter Showdown mode as a spawn unit, which again does wonders in that arena. If you could fly this thing anywhere, it would probably quite easily make the top 3, but because you'll never use it in Starfighter Assault, it's lucky to be on the list. The sister ship to the Vulture-class droid Starfighter, the Hyena bomber does its job and does it well. It has the same effective range as all the other bombers, outputs the same amount of damage, and generates the same amount of heat. In exchange for a little less bulk, it's a little more maneuverable, and its target profile is the most modest of all the bomber-class fighters. Noticeably, the Hyena fires at a faster rate than the Y-Wing and the TIE bombers, so ultimately it ends up doing most of the primary weapon damage in a cycle. Not handy for a head-to-head, but when you're doing an attack run, damage is all that matters. Now for the downsides, this thing is still slow. Being the fastest and most maneuverable bomber just means that the starfighters on your tail won't have to throttle down to the lowest level just to shoot you. Much like the TIE bomber, it's not terribly user-friendly, and it doesn't have an ability that sets it apart from its Imperial cousin. The only thing that makes it a bit more viable in its metagame is that your Hyena bomber is flying against Republic air vehicles and not Rebel ones, which move faster, last longer, and hit harder than their Clone Wars predecessors. Another classic prequel-era ship, the droid Starfighter ranks above its old nemesis, the N1, but that's solely for the universal availability in the Clone Wars era maps. The ship admittedly shoots faster than the TIE Fighter, maneuvers about as well, and has a slightly smaller profile and carries the same proton torpedo tubes. It also doesn't overheat as quickly as the TIE does either. That and the fact that it's easier to fly than the twitchy droid Starfighter and the lumbering Hyena bomber makes it the standard fighter of choice for rookie and some veteran CIS pilots. The downside is that the Vulture droid is adequate in its job and doesn't excel in any specific field, which sounds fine, but once we get to higher fighters on this list, you'll see why it isn't always a good thing. The lack of shields and recovery is hampering too, and that keeps it out of the top 5. Lore accurate indeed, and it makes sense from a balanced perspective, but it's really the perfect jack of all trades and master of none, making the Vulture droid a solid midway point in our rankings. This was another tough toss-up between this ship and the next one up, and I'm sure people will immediately understand why. The ARC-170 is the toughest of the Starfighter class starships to shoot down. Not only does it boast an impressive hull strength of over 1300, it also adds nearly 600 in damage protection via shielding before star cards. Perfect for new pilot learning the ropes. The damage output is almost irresponsible, outgunning even the X-Wing in pure primary weapon firepower. And surprisingly, the heat buildup is noticeably lower. It's also got a built-in interceptor deterrent and a tail gunner, which puts out enough damage to take down tri-fighters and Vulture droids alike. And if the ARC survivability wasn't good enough, you can always rely on your trusty astromech droid for some quick healing. So what's the problem? The ARC-170 is slow, like slower than any other fighter in its class. You need that extra HP, shielding, and turret to make a move successfully. The firepower from the secondary weapon still isn't enough to justify the speed difference. The ARC-170 is great if you want a fast, light bomber, but a slow, heavy fighter just doesn't cut it in a hectic game full of droid tri-fighters and swarming Vulture droids. Not always anyway. If it wasn't for the speed and maneuverability, it would easily make the top 5, but for now, it's just edged out. Well, you know where all the rebel ships are, so let's set the standard. First off, the Y-Wing is second to none in bulk amongst standard units. It outstrips tanks, starfighters, bombers, and even some hero ships in sheer durability. You have to strip away nearly 1,000 points in shielding just to get to the hull. That's pretty hardcore. The firepower output on the primary weapon is the slowest in the game, tied only with the TIE bomber in that regard, but it still hits pretty hard. A single volley can put a TIE interceptor or a tri-fighter into an immediate tailspin if they're hit head-on. But where the Y-Wing shines are in its abilities and countermeasures. The proton torpedo barrage is equivalent to the Hyena bomber and the TIE bomber, so that's not an issue at all. But what really makes this ship special is the automated ion turret. The turret fires on enemy craft and hardpoints, delivering damage and disabling their special abilities. This is all while slowing enemy ships down and making them even easier to hit with blasters and torpedoes if you're feeling fierce. The weapon can also be used offensively to make your dogfighting easier or to increase your damage output on an objective, and this weapon can be used defensively to shut down an enemy fighter on your 6, long enough for you to escape, complete an attack run, counterattack, or call for help from one of your X-Wing flying buddies. And on the offhanded chance someone can cut through all those defenses, you have your trusty R2 unit to restore your health, almost certainly resulting in you lasting long enough to use your prior ability again. The ion cannon is truly the workhorse of this ship. But like any other ship, the Y-Wing has its disadvantages. It's a bomber and likely the slowest of the 3. Yes, I say 3 since there doesn't seem to be a noticeable difference between the BLT-B class from the Clone Wars and the BLT-A4 class from the Civil War. So yes, it's the slowest of the 3. Also the least maneuverable, and bombers as a whole are not easy to use for new players, or even some veteran players. But if I need to fly a bomber, I feel confident that I can get the job done in a Y-wing. Not always survive, but at least do some chip damage before I go down, and maybe pick off a pilot or 2 in the way. And that's what puts this ship in the top 5. I'm going to be in big trouble for this one, but I think the TIE Interceptor is better than the First Order variant in the V-Wing. For one, it has the rare quad laser cannon configuration, so while the rate of fire isn't any faster than the First Order counterpart, it does more damage at around the same heat cost. The ship is hyper-specialized in its role and it's nearly the perfect dogfighter. It's equipped with concussion missiles, which are about 75% as effective as a proton torpedo, faster and a bit more accurate. It also has an afterburner to maintain a speed advantage or to escape the speedier A-Wing in a pinch. And my favorite part is the hard lock ability. This is a unique ability to the Interceptor class ships and hero ships that increases your damage output on a target until it dies or you do. This also reduces missile lock time, and if you're at close range, there are few things, if any, that your opponent can do to escape. What brings the TIE Interceptor down is its environment. While this is a remarkable X-Wing killer, at best it's equal to an A-Wing. At worst, it's a less focused A-Wing that hits slower. Its shape makes it a bit more awkward to control and maneuver, specifically in enclosed spaces, and the ship doesn't feel quite fast enough to have such little bulk. So much so that the additional bulk of the TIE Fighter actually feels like it's worth the trade for more consistent attack runs on objectives when you have to flex, which is often depending on your squadron and the enemy squadron. Still, the Imperial TIE Interceptor certainly outshines its First Order grandson, because I've never flown this thing through an enemy formation and wished for a turret, whereas I can easily abuse the hard lock. That's what locks the TIE Interceptor into 4th place. Much to my surprise, and I can see this changing as the metagame develops, the A-Wing Interceptor is my 3rd place pick. Now the A-Wing can out-dogfight anything on this list. It's got some of the fastest blasters in the game. They hit more than hard enough, they're very accurate, and don't heat up quickly. The ship is fast, nimble, and one of the smallest ships in the games, making it one of the hardest to hit. It carries the same abilities as the TIE Interceptor with the speed boost, the hard lock, and the concussion missiles, so it focuses as an auxiliary strike craft. But the difference maker is that the A-Wing is, in my opinion, a bit faster and therefore makes the better Interceptor. In its role, the ship is nearly perfect, and there's only one Interceptor that I'd rather fly. Also, out of the Interceptor craft, the A-Wing has the lowest learning curve and seems to be the most forgiving, despite its controls being so tight that they're twitchy. I'm not bragging when I say that I've flown entire matches in an A-Wing without being shot down. I'm actually shocked. Now the ship has weaknesses too. The aforementioned shock about not being shot down in an A-Wing stems from how dangerously fragile they are. The ship has the weakest hull in the game and the shields barely shore that up. I also find that the missiles have limited utility on a ship that primarily focuses on dogfighting. I rarely, if ever, find myself using them on defense, and on offense I'm rarely in a position to use them to damage hardpoints. I'm better off using them as a deterrent against hero ships or anything tailing a friendly bomber. That said, the A-Wing excels in its role, and does well to support other ships in other roles too, giving it the top 3 spot. I'll be honest, the top 3 Starfighters here were very difficult to choose. I thought about positions I'd want to be in, and in these positions, the fighter I think I'd want the most often is the Incom T-65B X-Wing. If this was a rogue leader tier list, I suspect this ship would be at the tippy top of the list because a lot of the traits from Rogue Squadron carry over to this fighter here, and that's a good thing. As the fighter that killed the Death Star twice, the X-Wing is the perfect beginner ship, but unlike many well-rounded, easy-to-learn early-game ships, the X-Wing is something that you'll want to continue to use once you realize that practically nothing else stacks up against it. Starting off with the primary weapon, only the ARC 170 outguns it in pure damage on the primary weapon, but it can shore up that weakness by using its quad laser cannon ability to increase the damage significantly for a short period of time. The trusty R2 unit keeps your shields and hull topped off in a difficult battle against the TIE Fighter, in some cases keeping you outside the death range from a barrage. And of course the old reliable proton torpedoes for use against enemy armor, hardpoints, and even the occasional ship if you're feeling lucky. But what sets the X-Wing apart is that the TIE Fighter can't outgun it, the TIE Interceptor can't easily outrun it, and the TIE Bomber can't get away from it. The ship is surprisingly accurate for strafing runs too on enemy infantry, and has availability on every map with an air component from the original trilogy era onward. It's also more durable than other fighters on the list like the TIE and the Vulture, with a hull rating that's almost equal, then shields on top of that. It feels almost unfair to have an objectively better Starfighter go up against these noticeably worse ones in the TIE family. There are very few, if any, situations that come up where I explicitly do not want an X-Wing, and oftentimes when I think I don't, I still end up in one and do much better. The X-Wing is hardly flawless. For one, it's still just a bit too slow to catch up to an interceptor that's flying at long range, and the engines on the back are a pretty big target for an enemy starfighter to hit. The Imperial Interceptor seems like a tailor-made hard counter in a dogfighting situation. But most importantly, the biggest weakness the X-Wing has is its overwhelming choice. Are you going to use it to strike an enemy capital ship? Will you be strafing turrets and enemy infantry? Are you going to use it as a snub fighter, perform light bombing runs? The same flexibility that makes the X-Wing so useful is compounded with choice paralyzation. You really have to have a plan with an X-Wing to get the most out of it. But that's more of a behavioral thing and not an issue with the ship. Honestly, the thing is nearly flawless, and if I got my wish for it to be a touch faster and a hair bulkier, it would probably be unstoppable and therefore unfair. Probably pretty controversial pick, but I'd venture to say my number one fighter is the droid Tri-Fighter. The interceptor that Dooku built, or paid for at least, the Tri-Fighter probably has some of the best features that make it stand out as the best interceptor in the game, and functionally, the best starfighter. The Tri-Fighter is small and fast, supplemented by an afterburner boost to break those hard missile locks, or to just outrun a missile before it can be fired. The ship fires incredibly quickly and has the highest interceptor damage output in the game, comparable to the TIE Starfighter, while firing twice as fast. The small profile, maneuverability, and speed makes this thing annoying as all get out to actually hit, and even most hero ships can't shake a good Tri-Fighter pilot, not without help. The abilities on their own are pretty substantial. It carries a heat sink to rapidly fire those high-powered lasers with absolutely no heat buildup for a solid 7 seconds, which gives you a kill on anything but a fully shielded and astromech supported Y-Wing, or some hero ships. Additionally, it carries a heavy laser cannon that's just as effective on hardpoints as it is on starfighters, and because it's so accurate, its payload delivery is like a proton torpedo that you don't have to lock on and aim with. And yes, it can be used very effectively at over 500 meters from the target. And what's even more impressive is that you can combine these effects. Fire up the heavy laser cannon, combine it with the heat sink, get another full volley in, you can clear any hero ship less bulky than the Millennium Falcon in a single well-aimed pass, or take a great chunk out of an enemy objective, be they bombers or hardpoints. And surprisingly, in infantry modes, the ship becomes more effective at strafing as the explosive blaster bolt damage is equalized between all starfighters and bombers. If there's any weakness on this craft it has, it's these. Number 1 is that the controls on this thing are too responsive. It's so maneuverable it's hard to control and correct. 2 is that it's weak. If you get caught going in a straight line at all for any reason, one blaster volley and you're space dust. But the upsides of this ship are so prominent that you can all but ignore the downsides. The Tri-Fighter is hyper-specialized, lore-accurate, and so damn effective that it's almost not worth flying any other Separatist craft into battle. Unless you really need the torpedo damage in a pinch, there's almost never a reason to pick a Vulture droid over this ship unless it's plain unavailable for whatever reason. But that's about it, and the Tri-Fighter takes the king spot. There's not a ship on this list that beats it in overall utility, efficiency, and effectiveness in combat. Well, until we get to the heroes, but that's a video for another day. So, what did you think of our list? Did we nail the ups and downs of each Starfighter? Is there a ship misplaced or missing from our list? Whatever your thoughts may be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. Until then, this has been Darth Magog Gaming, and I'm on the leader.